Thank you all for coming. I'm very honored to be included in Chicago Ideas Week. When I grew up, we moved around a lot, and we used to live not far from here in Racine, Wisconsin. Anybody here from Wisconsin? Is that like, y'all? Yay! So when we'd get like big occasions, we'd get all in our fancy clothes and come to Chicago. So it's nice to be back here. And I'm going to make up a PowerPoint presentation. I wish I looked at the back of my hair too. I wrote a memoir, and then I wrote 2 novels. So I was going to talk about the difference, between writing, nonfiction and fiction. But I've really enjoyed listening to the other speakers, especially the last speaker talking. I love that he put his reviews up there, which is, really brave of him to put the funny reviews. And when my first book was a memoir. It was about about something that happened to us. I guess that's what memoirs are. And I was not at all familiar with the publishing business. My husband's in the entertainment business, and I was familiar with that. And so my book came out, and I didn't understand what a failure it was for a really long time, because in the film business, if you have a film and it comes out and you're attached to it, especially if you're starring in it or you produced it, it's like they can't wait to tell you how bad. If it bombs, it's like they're standing on Friday night, waiting to call you and say, this film is awful, it's your fault, you're to blame, you'll never work again. And so my book came out, and it didn't get a lot of reviews, but it got some reviews, and they were really nice reviews. And so I had no way of knowing, and it's really a funny business, or especially was then. This is going back almost 10 years when my first book was published. So I actually wandered around under the lovely, fool's paradise of thinking people were buying my book. And so I one day had a talk with my agent and said, "So how's it doing?" The book had been out for like 4 months, and so I thought, maybe it's going to someday get on the bestseller list. And I said, "So now how does that happen? What can we do? When am I how would I get on this bestseller list?" And he said, "Oh, honey, your book's never going to be on the bestseller list." But it's holding its own. So it's just I really loved how kind of polite the publishing business was. But my first book, An Innocent Abroad, was about something that happened to us. We were very young, and I met my husband in college. He's the actor Dennis Leary, but when I met him, he was just a struggling comic doing stand-up mic nights, and he was seen at Catch a Rising Star in New York performing, and by this BBC company, and they thought he was a big star. They thought he was really funny, and they had him come over and do this show called London Underground, and it was just up-and-coming American comics. It was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to us. I was 6 months pregnant. We had no money. We could barely pay our rent. We had never been overseas. We had never flown first class. They were flying us first class to London. It was really exciting. We were supposed to be there for 2 nights. And then I went into labor, and we stayed for 6 months. So my first book, An Innocent Abroad, is about that. And it's a kind of a fish-out-of-water story. Am I talking too fast? I am? Okay, I'll sit down. I did a talk once, and this old man came up afterwards, and he said nobody understood anything he said. So anyway, but I don't want to talk too long either. So anyway, the baby was premature, and so I had spent a lot of time in a National Health Service hospital, which was amazing, by the way. The British National Health Service is quite amazing. So the book was about that, but it was also about how my husband's career took off because he's developed an audience there. And eventually, the baby did fine. Now he's, a big 24-year-old man. And but at the end of it, my husband went to this Edinburgh Film Fringe Festival, which is a performing arts festival that we had never heard of, and it's how his career got launched. He wrote a one-man show and later took it off Broadway. If he hadn't done that, I don't know what, I'd probably still be waitressing today and trying to write short stories and sending them in, which is what I was doing before we went there. But what happened was when I wrote this book 10 years later, and it took me 10 years because it was such a traumatic thing, and as he said, often, stories, memoirs come from trauma. For the first 10 years, when I'd try to tell what happened, I would have to stop and, I'd say, well, he was really premature, and then I'd be like, but he's fine. I'd start crying. But then one time I started telling the story when he was big and playing baseball, and we were watching him play, and this time I remembered all the funny stuff that happened, and there were lots of really funny things. I was a total rube. I had, just very, very funny, embarrassing stuff about being a young mother in a strange place all by myself. and I decided to write this book. And what's great about writing nonfiction, writing memoir, is that you know the story. I knew exactly how it was going to end. I knew how it was going to begin. I knew the middle. And I wrote the last chapter first, and then I just worked my way to it. And the last chapter was in Edinburgh. So that was the easy part about writing memoir. But I've said before, and I think other writers have said this too, when you write nonfiction, people always want to know, like, well, how much of it was real and how much of it was made up? And, in a memoir, it's supposed to be all real. And I did do a little thing at the beginning saying, this happened 10 years ago. Some of the dialogue might have been reconstructed, but the essence of it is real. But people always think you made stuff up. And then if you write fiction, in my case, they always want to know, well, how much of it is it really real? My first novel was about a woman who married somebody in college, and then he became famous and had an affair, and everyone thought it was about us. And that was a novel, so that was really fiction. But I did draw from experiences that happened in our life. We did have the opportunity of, kind of having him turn in, having our lives changed by, his fame, and that's really what the book was about. And then my most recent book, The Good House, is not, people then are surprised that none of the characters resemble me or anyone in my family. But in fact, I feel that I've been more honest in this book about people I know and maybe myself than any of my other books. The Good House is set on the North Shore of Boston. When I was 14, I moved from Racine, Wisconsin to a town called Marblehead, which is on the North Shore of Boston. It's very quaint. It's very historic. I was used to living in towns where, like I said, we moved a lot. I'd never met anyone who grew up in the towns I lived in, but in Marblehead, it seemed to everybody, either they grew up there, their parents grew up there, their grandparents. I had friends named Dolliver, and I had friends named Peach, and there was a Dolliver's Cove and a Peach's Point, and people had all lived there since the 1600s. So that was really something to me. And everyone, there was a very sameness to this, and very much this New England personality that was really distinct. And I'm glad I moved there when I was 14 because I was extremely aware of it and aware of feeling not the same or not belonging or something. So anyway, this book I wrote is about a real townie, a real Yankee, and in New England it means a little something different than maybe it means in other parts of the country, but this type of Yankee is somebody who's kind of, not the most cuddly person and a little bit, flinty and strident, and she's a 60-year-old real estate broker who struggles with a few things. She's was once the top real estate broker in her town, but the economy's not doing well, so that's a problem. And the real estate market's not doing well. It's another problem. And her adult daughters think she has a drinking problem and have sent her off to rehab, and she doesn't. She knows she's not an alcoholic. So that's what she's struggling with at the beginning of the book and throughout the book. So it's a book about an alcoholic in denial, told from the point of view of the alcoholic in denial. So since this book came out, people keep asking me, how did you come up with this character she drinks alone. She has to because her annoying daughters did send her off to Hazelden. And so now her solution, she knows she doesn't have a drinking problem, is she drinks, in her basement. She loves her party of one. She loves her kind of solo drinking. So anyway, we all have websites, all authors now, and you can contact us on these websites and send emails, which is great because it's easy to respond. And I get a lot of emails from people either who think I'm Dr. Drew and have confessed, and I get these every day, people who want to tell me that they're just like Hildy, my character, they also drink alone, what should they do? And then others who actually think that Hildy's like me. And yet last night I got a very scolding email because Hildy, the character in my book, is very judgmental about the way people bring up kids, and she makes some snide remark about Montessori schools. So I got this long letter from somebody saying, "You're wrong. I don't know why you hate Montessori schools and blah. Why do you hate? It's so great." And I just say, "No, so it's the character, and it really, she and I'm not. My kids went to Montessori school, so I guess my point is, this character Hildy in the book is somebody that is really not like me, although I'd love to be like Hildy in many ways. I'm kind of a people-pleasing person. I'd love to be quite opinionated and kind of a stand my ground type of person. But in some ways she is like me, and she's like quite a few people I know. And I feel like for me, the difference between nonfiction and fiction, the reason I will always write fiction is, all these kind of character traits that, I guess some people might call them flaws in my personality, such as it's not like I'm an outright gossip, but if I hear a story, it's hard for me not to tell it, especially if it involves somebody else's like shame or misfortune. I like to tell it to other people, and some people think that's not very nice. And then I often don't think the story's interesting enough, so I like to embellish it up a little bit. I'm not like an outright liar, but I like to, make it more interesting. So I now get to say, but it's because I'm a writer, it's what I do when people get mad when I do that. And I like to, I tell people I'm not, so don't overshare with me, because I will definitely overshare with others. But I do really like that. I do believe truth is stranger than fiction. I love to hear, we do live in kind of a small town now. I am an EMT. In our communities, it's all volunteer fire and EMT. I love it. It's one of the reasons I decided to do it is, it's going to have an empty nest. I wanted to give back to the community, but like a lot of, and I know I'm speaking for some of my fellow EMTs, it's like the best way to find out everything that's going on in my small town. It's like, I've said, we don't get paid in money, but what I get in info is priceless. And we don't talk while the patient's there, while we're working on the patient usually, especially if they're conscious. We don't gossip. But on the way back is when you hear everything in this town. And most of the people on my crew, they're real townies. Now I live in another New England town. Because I'm not from New England, I just love it, and I romanticize it much more than people who are actually from there. But the people in my town are true, especially these EMT people, they're true New Englanders, and so I love to get all the local lore, and they're the kind of people, really, they would really do anything, to help their neighbor, but they wouldn't want anyone to know about it, because they don't want people to know that they're really nice, because they might take advantage of them. And I love that. I love that about them. And so the ride back is usually, a lot of, who's doing that to who, and who's screwing what, and who's stealing from the town by, stealing somebody's shrubs. So anyway, I've never done such a disorganized talk. I usually read a very short thing, because I feel if you want to read, buy the book and read it. Otherwise, you don't really want me to read it to you, hopefully, because I'm not going to. But I am, again, so honored to be here. And now I'm just really looking forward to our next speaker, Terry McMillan, who I had the honor of meeting backstage, who's fabulous. Thank you all.